The firefight had lasted only minutes, but in the dense jungles along the borders of Laos and Cambodia, that was often enough to decide who lived and who died. As the last American helicopters clawed into the sky under heavy fire, not every member of the reconnaissance team made it out. In the silence that followed, North Vietnamese soldiers moved cautiously through the shattered vegetation, searching the battlefield. Among the abandoned equipment, they found something unusual: a rifle unlike the standard M16s carried by most American troops. To them, it was more than a battlefield trophy. It was a clue. During the Vietnam War, few American organizations were as secretive as the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group, better known as MACV SOG. Officially, many of its missions never happened. Its operators crossed international borders into Laos, Cambodia, and sometimes beyond, gathering intelligence, directing airstrikes, monitoring enemy movements, and disrupting supply routes deep behind enemy lines. These were missions conducted in places where the United States publicly claimed it was not fighting. Because of the unique demands of those operations, MACV SOG teams often carried equipment that differed from conventional U.S. forces. Standard-issue weapons were sometimes modified for reliability in harsh jungle conditions, fitted with suppressors for reconnaissance missions, or replaced altogether with captured enemy firearms when stealth required complete deception. Every piece of equipment reflected hard-earned experience and the constant need to survive in enemy territory. North Vietnamese commanders quickly realized they were facing an opponent unlike ordinary infantry. Reconnaissance teams were small, often only 6 to 8 men, but they penetrated deep into areas considered secure by the North Vietnamese Army. They observed truck convoys on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, identified anti-aircraft positions, and called in devastating airstrikes before disappearing back into the jungle. Stopping them became a priority. Entire security units were assigned to hunt these teams. Experienced trackers learned to recognize the smallest disturbances in vegetation, broken branches, or footprints hidden beneath layers of leaves. Villages suspected of helping reconnaissance patrols were carefully watched, and likely helicopter landing zones were monitored for signs of extraction attempts. When contact finally occurred, it was rarely accidental. The North Vietnamese preferred to surround reconnaissance teams with overwhelming numbers, cutting off escape routes before launching coordinated attacks from multiple directions. Their objective was not simply to destroy the patrol. Capturing radios, maps, documents, and weapons could provide intelligence that lasted far longer than any single battlefield victory. For MACV SOG operators, this created an unspoken rule: sensitive equipment could never be allowed to fall into enemy hands if there was any chance of preventing it. Operators carried demolition grenades, destroyed radios with rifle butts, burned classified papers, and stripped maps into unreadable fragments whenever extraction became uncertain. Every second spent destroying equipment increased the danger, but leaving it behind could expose future missions and the lives of other teams operating hundreds of miles away. Weapons presented a different challenge. A rifle could not simply be folded into a pocket or burned in seconds. If a wounded operator had to be evacuated quickly, or if a position collapsed under overwhelming fire, there was no guarantee every firearm would leave the battlefield. When the North Vietnamese recovered one of these unusual weapons, it immediately attracted attention. Some featured shortened barrels designed for maneuvering through thick vegetation. Others carried suppressors rarely encountered on conventional battlefields. Certain rifles showed modifications made by experienced armorers, while others included optics, specialized slings, or accessories uncommon among regular American infantry. Each feature raised questions. Why did these soldiers operate differently? Where had they come from? What kind of missions required such equipment? To intelligence officers, the weapon itself became evidence that a highly specialized force was operating beyond officially acknowledged battlefields. Captured firearms were carefully examined, not because they possessed magical capabilities, but because every scratch, modification, serial marking, and accessory revealed something about the people who carried them. Engineers studied manufacturing details. Armorers evaluated reliability and maintenance. Intelligence personnel compared captured equipment with reports from previous engagements, gradually building a clearer picture of America's covert operations. The weapon was only the beginning. If recovered alongside radios, survival gear, coded notebooks, or aerial photographs, The intelligence value increased dramatically. Even small discoveries could reveal patrol habits, preferred insertion areas, communication methods, or logistical support networks. For the men still operating behind enemy lines, every lost piece of equipment represented another advantage handed to an enemy already familiar with the terrain. And that meant the next mission could become even more dangerous. The North Vietnamese Army understood that modern warfare was fought with information as much as bullets. Every captured item was catalogued, compared, and analyzed. A customized Car-15 with a sound suppressor suggested missions where silence mattered more than sustained firefights. A foreign-made weapon carried by an American hinted at deception tactics. Even the ammunition a team carried could reveal how long they expected to remain behind enemy lines. Yet the greatest prize was never the weapon itself. It was understanding the men who carried it. MACV SOG teams relied on speed, surprise, and secrecy. Their greatest protection was that the enemy often didn't know exactly where they would appear next. Every successful recovery of American equipment helped reduce that uncertainty. Patterns began to emerge. Intelligence officers could compare the locations of previous clashes, estimate likely infiltration routes, and identify sections of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that attracted repeated American interest. This forced MACV SOG to adapt constantly. Insertion points changed. Extraction procedures became less predictable. Teams varied their movement techniques, altered radio schedules, and used deception whenever possible. Helicopters sometimes approached from unexpected directions before making sudden turns toward hidden landing zones. Reconnaissance patrols deliberately left misleading signs to confuse trackers, while supporting aircraft created diversions miles away from the real operation. The contest became a deadly game of adaptation. Every improvement by one side forced an immediate response from the other. For North Vietnamese soldiers on the ground, capturing an unusual American weapon also carried practical value. Many were already familiar with U.S. firearms. Throughout the war, both the NVA and Viet Cong used captured M16 rifles whenever ammunition and spare parts were available. Some appreciated the lighter weight and higher rate of fire compared with older Soviet or Chinese designs. Others preferred to study them for weaknesses rather than rely on them in combat. Specialized MACV SOG weapons, however, presented different challenges. A suppressed rifle was exceptionally useful for reconnaissance, but suppressors wore out and required maintenance that was difficult to perform without replacement parts. Modified carbines often depended on components unavailable within North Vietnamese supply systems. Optical sights could improve accuracy, yet damaged lenses or broken mounts were almost impossible to replace in the field. Because of these limitations, many captured weapons served another purpose. They became teaching tools. Armorers carefully disassembled unfamiliar firearms, learning how American engineers solved problems of reliability, weight reduction, and ergonomics. Intelligence officers photographed unique accessories before forwarding detailed reports through military channels. Instructors could then brief combat units about the capabilities and limitations of the equipment they might encounter during future engagements. Knowledge spread much farther than the weapon itself. Meanwhile, MACV SOG operators understood exactly what was at stake if they failed to recover sensitive equipment. Veterans later recalled the importance of accountability after every mission. Teams checked every weapon, every radio, every map case, and every classified item before leaving an extraction site whenever conditions allowed. If someone was killed or severely wounded, surviving teammates often risked their own lives attempting to retrieve both the individual and any sensitive equipment that remained nearby. These actions were not driven by sentiment alone. A single classified radio frequency card could compromise communications. A coded notebook might expose operating procedures. A marked map could reveal observation posts or future objectives. Even an apparently ordinary rifle could confirm the presence of elite reconnaissance units in areas where official policy denied they were operating. There were occasions when recovering equipment became nearly impossible. Helicopters arriving under intense enemy fire sometimes had only seconds to land. Crew chiefs shouted for teams to board immediately, while door gunners fired continuously into surrounding tree lines. Smoke grenades obscured visibility. Rotor wash scattered leaves and dust across tiny landing zones carved from thick jungle. In those desperate moments, saving lives always came first. Some equipment simply had to be abandoned. North Vietnamese search teams frequently moved into those same landing zones after American aircraft departed. They recovered ammunition, damaged radios, web gear, backpacks, and occasionally weapons left behind during the chaos. Each item was another fragment of a larger intelligence puzzle. Still, the image of the NVA suddenly acquiring revolutionary American technology is largely a myth. Most MACV SOG weapons were advanced only in the sense that they were customized for highly specialized missions. Their true value lay in what they revealed about tactics, rather than in any secret engineering breakthrough. The enemy gained useful insights, but not a miraculous advantage that transformed the battlefield overnight. Instead, every captured weapon represented another chapter in an ongoing contest between two highly adaptive opponents, one seeking to remain invisible, the other determined to expose them. In the years after the Vietnam War, veterans from both sides reflected on a conflict defined not by a single decisive battle, but by constant adaptation. Few organizations illustrated that reality better than MACV SOG. Operating in secrecy, its reconnaissance teams depended on staying unpredictable. Every mission required balancing aggression with stealth, and every operator understood that survival often depended on denying the enemy even the smallest piece of useful information. For the North Vietnamese Army, capturing a MACV SOG weapon was never simply about adding another rifle to their arsenal. It was about understanding an opponent whose existence was officially denied. Each recovered firearm, damaged radio, map case, or backpack became another clue in a much larger intelligence effort. Analysts compared equipment from different engagements, searching for recurring patterns. Field commanders combined those findings with reports from patrols, prisoner interrogations, and local observations, gradually refining the tactics used to locate and engage future reconnaissance teams. This process reflected a broader truth about the Vietnam War. Victory was rarely determined by superior technology alone. Both sides constantly studied one another, copying successful ideas while developing countermeasures for new threats. American forces improved helicopter tactics, surveillance methods, and special operations techniques. The North Vietnamese responded with better camouflage, decentralized logistics, sophisticated air defense networks, and increasingly effective counter-reconnaissance operations. The contest became one of continuous learning. For MACV SOG operators, that meant every mission grew more dangerous. Areas that had once provided relatively safe observation points could become heavily defended weeks later. Landing zones that had worked during one operation might already be under surveillance during the next. Routes used successfully in the past often had to be abandoned before they became predictable. Experience, rather than equipment, remained their greatest advantage. Veterans repeatedly emphasized that discipline, patience, and teamwork mattered far more than carrying an unusual rifle. A customized CAR-15 or a suppressed weapon could provide a tactical edge in specific situations, but it could never replace sound fieldcraft, careful planning, or the trust built between teammates operating deep inside hostile territory. Likewise, the North Vietnamese never assumed that capturing advanced equipment guaranteed success. They respected what those weapons represented: highly trained soldiers willing to penetrate some of the most dangerous regions of Southeast Asia. Recovering their equipment offered valuable intelligence, but defeating them still required disciplined troops, skilled trackers, careful planning, and the ability to react quickly in unforgiving terrain. In many ways, the story of a captured MACV SOG weapon symbolizes the larger intelligence war that unfolded alongside the shooting war. Behind every firefight was another battle fought through observation, analysis, deception, and adaptation. Weapons revealed tactics, maps exposed intentions, radio equipment hinted at communication methods. Even the smallest piece of abandoned gear could become part of a much larger picture assembled by determined intelligence officers. That constant struggle shaped countless operations throughout the conflict. It also explains why MACV SOG teams placed such extraordinary importance on recovering sensitive equipment whenever possible. They understood that protecting their secrets meant protecting future missions and the lives of operators who would enter the jungle long after they had returned home. Today, many of those customized weapons sit behind museum glass or in carefully preserved private collections. They are often admired for their distinctive appearance or their connection to one of America's most secretive special operations units. Yet their greatest significance lies not in their mechanical design, but in the stories they carry. Stories of men operating in silence, deep behind enemy lines, where success depended on remaining unseen. And when one of those weapons was captured, the real prize was never the steel, aluminum, or wood. It was the knowledge it could reveal. In a war where information was as valuable as ammunition, every recovered weapon became another move in a deadly contest between two determined adversaries. The jungle concealed both sides, but neither ever stopped searching for an advantage. Long after the echoes of gunfire faded, that invisible battle of intelligence, adaptation, and survival remained one of the defining legacies of the secret war fought by MACV SOG.